So, coming back to the original program, next on the list is navigating Gaia-X compliance and app prototyping, your path to app development within trusted environment, dataspaces. And I like to ask Aleksandar Kelecevic, I hope I pronounced the name properly, yeah? Product and Technology Lead Data Economy T-Systems International. By the way, side note, I don't know if you're aware of that one, but your ex-boss is just working 10 kilometers away from here. So he couldn't join us tonight. Yeah, he couldn't join us today, but well, stage is yours. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, thank you. Hello, everyone. Hope you're fresh back from the coffee break. So it's a big pleasure to be here, and I'm very glad to be able to present this early in the program, so I can give you some, hopefully, food for thought for the next 2 days. What we're going to talk about is application prototyping, so I hope the hackathon team will also see something that is interesting for them. But in essence, what I would like to show you is one approach to developing developing these dataspace-centric applications, prototyping them, and then leading them fully to production, but also how to make sure that what you create is, first off, becomes Gaia-X compliant, and then stays Gaia-X compliant as you evolve. But before that, let's see why are we talking about application development this early on. So, in short, what you see on the left is one way of depicting what would be the set of ingredients of building value in a data ecosystem. What we have in the center, the juicy goodness, would be the use cases, the actual things that you want to focus about. This is your reduction of carbon footprint. This is your optimization of your supply chain, researching new medication, new therapies, you name it. Around that is a set of business applications or use case applications, anything that can and might help you work on those use cases. We're talking about your portals, your dashboards, your machine learning models, your connections to business support systems, anything that can make sense of this new data you're exposed to and process them in accordance to your use cases. What we have outside of this light gray layer would be the one that you're hopefully most familiar with, the data space one. This is where your participants, your services, your data actually lives. And as we've heard, we had great progress in developing open source building blocks exactly in this domain. Last but not least, the outer shell would be your infrastructure, exactly the virtual and physical hardware where all of these goodies are running. Now, as you can imagine, the outer layers, same with fruit, this is why this depiction comes in nicely. The point of the outer layers is to support and enable the ones inside. What we have been now doing for years, and you have heard of various organizations and associations that have been part of that, is that we have been working our way outside in, focusing on the sovereign infrastructure inside and outside of Europe, focusing on building blocks, the open source services that can make up a data space. What we feel is the right time now is to focus exactly on these business applications. Let these enabler layers enable you, and let us build something new. Now, for the rest of this talk, I would like to invite you to imagine that sovereign data exchange between A and B, whatever and wherever A and B might be, is a solved problem. That you can move data securely across different technical and administrative landscapes. And let's see what we can build from that point onwards. Or, better yet, let's not imagine too much, and let me show you what we have been working on in T-Systems that can bridge that gap. What you see on the left, and it is purposely complex because I want to show you what is under the hood, and then we will shed away some complexity in the detail, is a T-Systems living lab. This is our application prototyping environment, as I mentioned, very hackathon-centric. And it is basically development environment based on a data space in a box. As mentioned very early on by Ulrich, you actually choose exactly the domain, you choose where you want to run it, and you let us or others take care of the complexities. Going bottom up, and this setup is exactly the same that we have seen on the previous slide, going bottom up, you see the infrastructure layer. This is where your storage accounts, your buckets live, where your compute clusters, where your Kubernetes and Spark lives, where your network infrastructure resides. One level up, we have the data space layer. This is exactly these open source, possibly in this case all of them, services that make up the data space itself. Is it federated? Is it centralized, decentralized? This depends on the data space itself, but these are the bits and pieces that you would need to just have the data space exist. Plus, any kind of service that is associated to each participant individually, what you've heard of as participant agents, your wallets, your data connectors, your data preparation pipelines, anything that you might want to associate technically with a participant in your ecosystem. At the very top, in magenta, this is the application layer. This is exactly where your business applications that you and the participants in your system are going to build. Last but not least, and this is the addition to the previous model, would be the development toolkit. Exactly the set of tools that we believe are helpful or downright necessary to start developing these cloud-native and data space-native applications. What exactly you have in this dev toolkit, we'll take a look at later. Now, this is the actual complexity. What we would like our customers and everyone in this room to need to worry about is this. What you see is that the infrastructure and data space layers have been grayed out. They have not become black boxes. You can still see what is inside. They're gray for a reason. You do not need to go into details of what is inside those layers. You could just take it off the shelf, say, I would like to have infrastructure running in Germany. I would like to have a data space layer that is fine-tuned for streaming data and federated learning, and that's it. You can choose to peek under the hood, to make choices there, to break it, to reset it, to start from scratch and choose a different direction, or you can choose not to choose. You can choose to say, I just want to be enabled. Let me focus on my application development. Let me focus on value creation, and others can do the enablement for me. So we've seen how you could approach application development. Now, let's see what we can do on the compliance side of the things. If you boil it down, and I know I'm oversimplifying a bit, hope you will forgive me for this, but you could say that a data space is solely a collection of its participants who are exchanging data and services, services and apps themselves, data, which would be a lifeblood of a data space, and standards, regulations, basically the framework that defines how a data space functions. Now, if I would like to claim that my data space is compliant, one could argue that I could just prove that I have compliant participants, compliant services and applications, compliant data, and compliant standards. Now, compliance standards, the last one I would leave out of this discussion. This is more in the line of making sure that the framework that you have defined for your data space is in line with the spirit of Gaia-X, that you're not breaking any of the assumptions, and that how you're extending it is specific to your domain. The compliant participants, services, and data is exactly what Gaia-X allows us to do. You have heard an hour before of the verifiable credentials and how they bring value to the system. And coincidentally or not, these exactly map to the things that we want to make sure are compliant. Legal participant, service offering and service instance, and data resource. These are exactly the types of credentials that we're talking about in the Gaia-X ecosystem. What you need to do, and this is my quick review of what a credential is, but you have heard it in much more detail. For every one of these entities, those entities themselves or someone in their stead would need to provide some details about them, basically some statements about who they are, where they are, what functionalities do they provide. That said, something would need to verify those claims, again, depending in which direction they go. So you might need to have help from a third party. This, in that case, would be the conformance assessment bodies that would check if your statements are actually true, provide evidence for that. For example, are you ISO certified or not? You take all of these claims, the evidence for those claims, you shape them up in a technically correct way, you sign them, as you've heard, and then you pass them for the final seal of approval to a Gaia-X digital clearinghouse. It checks whether all of these criteria have been met, and depending on the severity of your claims, issues you compliance credentials or different Gaia-X trust labels that were mentioned. In the end, what you have as an input in your system would be a set of credentials, again, describing credentials, describing participants, service offerings and instances, and data resources. we've seen the application prototyping part, we've seen the compliance part. Now, let's see how we can combine these two. What you see on the left, again, is a living lab in all of its glory. Not much has changed. On the right, a Gaia-X digital clearinghouse. The one depicted is the one operated by T-Systems. Nothing of this discussion is specific to this particular clearinghouse node. They're all interchangeable, at least from this perspective, and it could be replaced by any one of them. What you see in the dev toolkit, and that was not mentioned before, is an intermediary, a little application, process, call it whatever, that we call the clearinghouse agent. Its whole purpose is to observe what is happening in your data space and to react on any change, meaning any participant onboarding, any service deployment, any new asset being created in a data space. And depending on how you configure it, it would take all of those details, shape them up in an appropriate way, in the appropriate credential, and then send them off to the digital clearinghouse to be finally signed and returned back into the ecosystem. The grand idea is that what you get out of the box with Living Lab is empty, meaning has no participants, has no services, at least not the application layer, and has no data in it. The infrastructure and the services themselves that come out of the box are Gaia-X compliant, which means that you start with the Gaia-X compliant base, and as you move along, as you add anything, provided that thing that you add is actually Gaia-X compliant in itself, you don't need to worry about this being a manual process. It happens as you go along. This allows you to evolve your data space, evolve your use cases, your business processes, your participants, your way of thinking, without having to worry about Gaia-X compliance. If you take this picture and then extend it a few steps forward, we can talk about this, that we gather all of these credentials, put them in a single searchable database. Let's call it a federated catalog. And then we can have a nice UI on top of that, and you have a very convenient and no effort registry of everything that is happening in your data space. You can browse your participants, service offerings, or data. Of course, every participant, as mentioned, would be able to configure what exactly is exposed. So this is not disruptive transparency. You are still in control of your data, of your identity, and identity of the services and assets that you offer. But still, it allows you to have a Gaia-X compliant data space without having that explicitly on your mind. That's it. Looking at the time, and as the wrap-up of this talk, I would like you to take at least 3 things with you. One, that the data spaces, as we've seen, are just an enabler. We have been focusing on infrastructure, we have been focusing on data space technologies, and we will continue to do so. But we feel that the time is right, and we have some pioneers, and you have heard of some lighthouses that have been doing that. We feel that the time is right now to say that the data spaces themselves are here to stay, and that we can start focusing on the applications and value creation. Second, data space technology might look like rocket science. At some places, it might even be. This is why we have the great hackathon to broaden our understanding of it. But it doesn't need to be rocket science for everyone, or at least you don't need to care about the rocket that you're riding on. You can focus on the enablers, and T-Systems, the Living Lab that I have just presented, would be just one way of approaching it, that you say, yes, let us develop applications, let have others focus on the providing, enabling, and making sure that the nitty-gritty details under the hood actually function. Last but not least, and I hope this is for this round the most important thing, Gaia-X compliance should not, and hopefully will not, be an afterthought. Not a big quality gate that you need to pass, not a hurdle, but an opportunity. So what I have tried to show you here is how you make sure that the Gaia-X compliance can get your back, while you can boldly go wherever you dare to go. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for that interesting presentation. I'd like to rephrase one thing, that's about rocket science, because we have SAS Astra over here in the neighborhood, and the engineers over there, they operate a whole fleet of satellites. And then somebody comes up there, yeah, this is not rocket science. And they say, no, actually, indeed, it is rocket science. But it has gotten a lot easier to deal with that one. So it might still be rocket science, but it's not impossible to do that for the average person.